Good morning. Welcome to Care Team Training Session 4. We're making our way through the process. We're more than halfway through training now, and I thank you for sticking with it. We have guests today, special guests. I'm going to introduce them in just a minute, but we have a few housekeeping matters to take care of first. And as you know, the first one is devotion. So does anybody feel like this is their moment to share a little thought?
I can do it.
Great.
All right. Well, I'm going to read today from Jesus Always, Embracing Joy in His Presence. And this is written as though Jesus is talking directly to you. I am your shepherd, to guide and shield you. A good shepherd cares about his sheep and understands them very well. My care for you is wonderfully complete. I love you with perfect, unfailing love. I know everything about you. Your weaknesses and your limitations, your struggles and your sins, your strengths and abilities. So I am able to shepherd you exceptionally well. I have designed you to walk through this perilous world in trusting dependence on me. I lovingly go before you and open the way, carefully preparing the path you will follow. I remove many dangers and obstacles from the road ahead, and I will help you handle the difficulties that remain. Even when you walk through the darkest valley, you need not be afraid, for I am close beside you. Enjoy my nearness, beloved, and communicate with me. I will guide you carefully through this day and all your days, for I am your God forever and ever. I will be your guide even to the end. And then there's 4 verses. The Lord is my shepherd to feed, guide, and shield me. I shall not lack. Psalm 23:1 from the Amplified Version. Excuse me, I'm kind of out of breath this morning. In your unfailing love, you will lead people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling. Exodus 15:13. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. Psalm 23:4. For this God is our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even to the end. Psalm 48:14.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathy. And that's a good example of the kind of material it's nice to have in your briefcase or a little bag of tricks, your toolbox, we sometimes say, that you bring with you when you visit people, because there might be a need for it. It's good to have it. It's unfortunate to need it and not have it. So it's better to have it and not need it. So just to assemble materials like that you can use. Certainly in my time in the hospital, I can't tell you how many times I said the 23rd Psalm. I mean, a bunch of times. And so it might feel like I'm saying it an awful lot, but for the people that are hearing it, they're hearing it for the first time. All right, onward, homework review. So we asked you to shadow. Is that coming along okay? Some of these people may be hosting you, for all I know. So if you haven't, shadowing doesn't need to be done now, just by the end of our time together. So if you haven't scheduled it, then please do. If they're done, you can turn them in. Yeah. Send a supportive email or text. Remember, we heard from Nate Melcher last week about cyber support or online digital support. Did you have a chance to do that? And so tell me about it. What happened? You want to say?
My cousin and to figure out what her relationship is to him. His significant other were in town for 2 weeks visiting her mother who's dying. And I sent them an email after they left, inquiring about how they were doing and how she was doing.
And did you hear back?
Not yet.
Yep. So you
That was just 2 days ago.
cast it out there, so give them some time. And good for you. Did anybody else send a text, a supportive text? Did you try that? Did you?
I sent an email.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Someone in church had asked for prayers a couple weeks ago, and because he was having some kind of minor type surgery, but could have been bad. And so I just sent a very supportive text, and immediately I got a response, just thank you much, Anita. Thank you, Anita, so much appreciated.
Yeah.
And I came back just.
Yeah. It really warms people's hearts when they know that they're being thought about. I remember giving an invocation at a physician's banquet at the hospital where I worked in Florida. This is just decades ago, of course. But somewhere in the context of that little prayer, I said to this room full of physicians, I pray for you every day. And about a year or two later, a plastic surgeon came up to me. His name was Michael Gallant, and he said, I really appreciate knowing that you pray for me every day. And all of a sudden, I thought, I better be better about this, because I'm not sure I remember to do it every day. So then you do something to remind, put a rubber band around your wrist or something that reminds you to do something that you promised to do. So it's good to make a commitment to do something like this, but then you better actually do it. So, yeah. My little thing, what was it? It was a Facebook post of a wedding that I had helped perform just years and years ago. And it was on a very rainy day, so there's a picture of me holding an umbrella with a scuba mask on, saying this prayer.
Really rainy.
And and it was on a boat, and oh my goodness! The bride had posted it. It's my friends Tina and Rob from Florida, and I said, great to remember this wonderful day, except for that goofy guy giving the prayer. So, and because of the way Facebook works, you remember what Nate said? Because anybody can see it. Then post after post after post, remembering that day and how wet it was and what a nice time we had all the same, and when the sun came out. So it triggers all sorts of things when you put something in writing that not only the person, like the person you prayed for, can see, but if you put it on Facebook, it can go pretty far. So, as Nate said, don't type anything there that you wouldn't want your pastor to read, and do think about being as supportive as you can in just a few words. Doesn't take a lot. So, did you try something?
I sent a text. She had posted on Facebook that she was having some mental health struggles, and rather than replying on Facebook, because I didn't know how that would go as far as broadening the door,
Yeah.
I just sent her a personal text.
I think that was wise. Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Good
and she
for
did
you.
respond back to me almost right.
So it's a new day, and this really is a way of delivering very effective support. And if time is tight, as sometimes it is a way to get a message of concern and compassion across with just a few keystrokes. So I recommend it, and in fact I do it all the time. All right, next, the 7 listening skills. Did you try that with some family members, to try to be particularly attentive, look at them when they talk, and use your ears more than your mouth? That's hard, isn't it, sometimes? Did you notice stories flowed any differently than they might usually when you tried to do this? You're having a little giggle.
I tried this with my husband. It didn't go very well. He had one ear on the TV and one eye on me. You know how that goes. But there were a couple times when I kind of used a little different body language, kind of leaned forward and looked at him until he really looked at me, and then I said something, and then he responded, and it was like, okay, that
It worked.
I showed him that I was very, definitely
Really interested in
Yeah.
just you. Yeah, right here. Well, we have old ways of relating, particularly with people that we've known for a long time. So it takes a little while, but if you're going to have a serious conversation about something, then it's probably good to turn off the TV and stay as focused as you can on what one another's saying. Any other little quick examples?
I used it in, while we were on break in Bible study the other day with one of the ladies who wanted to share a story about some trip that she had had recently, and just asked her a few questions, and she just took off.
And off she goes.
Yeah,
Yep.
she was really enjoying
A
it.
well-placed opening question often is all you'll ever need to do. Good. All right. So we'll talk about the background check in a minute, and then devotions, and you did that, and anatomy of the visit, which is exactly what we're going to talk about in a moment. But first, any questions about these things we considered last time? Sympathy, empathy, alignment, reflective emotion, the 7 keys, so forth. If you weren't here, maybe you saw it on the video. Are you able to get to these video?
Yes, they're very helpful.
Good. Okay.
I had a question as well on page 15, the rule of 3s. If you ask more than 3 questions about the same subject, you're going to do therapy.
So that's a rule that I mentioned that I tend to share with law enforcement and emergency rescue personnel who aren't too used to getting in depth with people. I think it's not uncommon for us to engage in conversation that might go a little longer than that. But when you, and Ann might even be able to help us with this, but when you really hone in on a particular thing about how how did you really feel about your father, and how is that affecting your life today? And you keep drilling down on a subject like that, as you might do in a counseling session. This may not be the best venue for that. And it's not that maybe we shouldn't think about how we got along with our fathers or our mothers, because it does affect us in these days. But are we the right person to do that? And of course, if you open a whole can of worms and you're not equipped to deal with it, given your skill level, now Ann can do it because she has that skill set. So it has to do with your abilities and also what seems right for that relationship. I don't think this kind of visiting is meant to be therapy.
No.
And it might be people do need therapy.
Yeah. That leads to my next question. In
Yes.
the same box at the end, it says referral may be indicated. Are we going to talk anymore?
We're going to talk about that in just a moment, as a matter of fact. We are. Okay, which will bring us to this very next thing, is the Anatomy of the Visit article, which you'll find on the back of tab 3, I believe. It was homework for today. So I asked you to look at this, and I'm just going to run through it. A lot of this is covered in other talks that you'll hear, but under tab 3, it's in my notebook, it's blue. I'm not sure what color yours is, but it says Anatomy of the Visit Care Team Training. So the point here is that, and if you folks want to look at a notebook, there's one in the back over by the camera if you want to follow along with us. So preparation. The visit always begins before the visit. That's the point of this first section, which has to do with getting materials together, figuring out who you're going to see, find out from a pastor or others what's going on with the person that you visit as much as you can. Make sure you have the report forms along with you, communion supplies if you're going to bring communion, your name badge, remember, very important for getting into at least care facilities. And then if you've made notes on other visits, then go back and take a look at them. Are you having trouble finding it?
In
section 3.
Yeah, so move back to section 3. It was in last week's session. There you go. Second, make appointment if that is the right thing to do. Some care receivers appreciate that. Others, certainly there'll be people that I visited who are pretty incapacitated in nursing homes and they're just kind of in their room all day. So odds are you could probably catch them, but who knows? They could be out for a shower. Realize that around lunchtime is a time when they might be out of their room, and after lunch is a common time for naps, so bear that in mind. Think about how you're going to present yourself. The way all of you are dressed right now is just fine. I would suggest not being in your Sunday best or looking like you're about to go to the cabin, but somewhere in between. So you're approachable and casual. You don't want your clothing to be a barrier. And it's always a good idea to avoid perfumes and colognes and noisy jewelry, as it can be disruptive. Pick up anything you need. You remember, you've heard from the panel of caregivers, they talked about stopping by church and getting last Sunday's bulletin or our daily bread or whatever the thing might be that you could leave with them, church newsletters. And you heard Clark, I think, say that he brings along a little speaker so he can play a podcast of last Sunday's service, which is a fine way to spend time. I think do they just do the sermons here, or do they do the whole service? The whole service, yeah. There's some copyright issues, but if they get permission to do that, yeah, then you can listen to that. And so there's an hour right there of visit time as you listen to the service. When you get to the place you're going, if it's a facility, you could check with the staff, make sure this might be a good time to visit the person, family too, and are there any special needs? Is there anything going on that day?
How do you introduce yourself if they don't know you yet?
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm visiting from so-and-so church. I'm here to see this, Sam Smith.
And then to the client too?
Well, hopefully they know you, and certainly after the first visit, unless they have memory issues, in which case they might not remember you. And it's always good to introduce yourself for that reason. Hi, I'm Kathy from Hennepin Avenue Methodist, or whatever the church is. So if they don't remember your name, if you come to see me when I'm in the nursing home, I probably won't remember your name, just because I'm terrible with names. So just remind me of who you are.
But are we sent to visit people who don't know we're coming?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, because that's one of the reasons these three are here, is to talk about the assignment process. But it varies, yeah.
when it says check in with family, will we always have a family
You might.
name and
You can.
whatever?
Most people, well, I mean, in church records will have that.
Okay.
So that's a part of the homework you do once you receive an assignment, is find out who do they belong to, and where are their children, or where are their siblings, and because it's not uncommon that you actually need to talk to those people because something might be going on. So before entering the room, clear some space. Remember the now and quote about creating an empty space somewhere within you to put their story, and then the mind, body, spirit check to see how you're doing. If you're on your way to your visit and you see red lights flashing in your rearview mirror, you might need to take a little time to just debrief and decompress from that so you can be at least neutral. So if anything is going on in your life that's upsetting, then somehow you need to put that on a back burner so you can be attentive to the people. A few don'ts. Don't go to see the people if you're sick. That, I hope, would just be obvious. They have enough troubles without picking up the germ that you bring into their room. If you're really emotionally drained, it may not be wise to go see them. You can postpone it for another day. Don't be in a big hurry, and try not to be late if you make a time. I remember early in my career I was going to visit a woman named Tara Zander, old German, delightful lady, very pious. I would bring her communion. She'd get on her knees, literally, in her dining room to receive communion. And I missed an appointment one Saturday. I was supposed to be there and I didn't show up, and I realized it later, and I went to see her, and I will never forget her words. She said, "Pastor, where were you?" Oh, I'm sorry. I cannot be more sorry. So she taught me. It was a teachable moment for me. If you say you're going to show up, you really ought to show up, and if you're not going to, let them know you're going to be late. Getting in the room, over on the next page, knock somehow, even if it's a room, it's their space. I think it's always good to have a little tap on the door and let them know that you're there. Say their name. You should certainly know that. And then let them know who you are. If anybody else is in the room, including if you should go to a two-bed unit, say hi to the other person. It's just polite. And then if you're going to draw the drape between the two, you should ask permission to do it. Is it all right if I would just close this so we can have a little quiet time? It's not that they won't hear you. Sound will travel, but it does give the illusion of privacy anyway. And then remind them of the church that you're from. The detective work is simple. You use your senses, sometimes all five senses, just to figure out what might be going on here. Are there any unusual odors? What do you see? How does this person look? File that away. It's not necessarily anything you need to do with right then, but you're just gathering data that helps you make a pastoral diagnosis, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And then establish eye contact. Get to a place where they can see you. A visit will always seem longer if you're sitting than if you're standing. So this talk will seem shorter if I give the rest of it standing up, even though it might take exactly as long. If I sit down, it seems like a little longer, and that's how it goes with visits. And it's also that power dynamic we talked about earlier in our training, where if you're standing, you can leave, they can't. So try and be on an even level as much as you can. Don't interrupt TV shows, phone calls, procedures, and try not to let the bright light be behind you, because sometimes it's a little hard to see. Middle of the visit, here you're actually talking to people, or they hopefully are talking to you. So you get the conversation going by some kind of neutral, simple opening line. As you mentioned about the lady who took the trip, all you have to say is, "How was your trip?" And they'll take it from there. And then listen. Do you remember how we talked about listening to the corner, the area of concern from the psychosomatic pyramid? Do they answer with a body question, a mind question, or a spirit question? And then stay with that until it's run its course. I think that's mentioned under number 3. Find ways to align with them. What might you have in common? Body, mind, and spirit. And all this time you're making what we have called, what we at least in hospital ministry call, make a pastoral diagnosis. What's going on with this person? What's really important to them, and how can I help? And that's the area of concern piece. Watch for nonverbal messages. We talked about that last time, and silent attending. But silence is not necessarily bad unless it just goes on insufferably long, with them waiting for you to say something, anything to just break the silence. But Phil Donahue was great at this. If you ever remember Phil Donahue years and years ago, his talk show, he would just say, "Well, I wonder what you're thinking about that," or "What's going on? What's running through your mind?" And that lets them go wherever they want to. as opposed to directive questions, which I think will come up in a minute, where you tell them where to go. If you don't drift into your own storytelling, even though that's so tempting to do. I'd love to talk about my trip now that you've told me about yours. Yet this is their nickel, right? This is their time to tell their story. And if you need to tell your story, if you want to talk about your trip, maybe you should find a different listener, unless it really is a give and take and they want genuinely to know the interesting things that are going on in your life. Change subjects to something you want to talk about, unless you sense it's okay. That should say okay in the lower right-hand corner. Yeah, that's the little legs of the K are missing. And change the focus from spirit to body if they're on mind before they're ready to leave. Responding and interacting then. Response is more like a tennis match than a golf game. It's not like you hit a ball and I hit a ball and you hit a ball. It's a back and forth. That's the way we talk, except for right now while I'm doing all the talking. But it's interactive, and hopefully they're doing more talking. Every once in a while you'll find somebody who just is a tough nut to crack, and no matter how many open and directive or non-directive questions you ask, you're not getting anywhere. When my wife talks to her brother in Pennsylvania, it's like that. She said, well, that was 5 minutes. That's about as much as we can talk. As he never talks very much. Probably have to edit that out of the videotape. But anyway, some people are a lot easier to talk to than others. Here's mentions your toolkit. We've talked about some of these things. We have yet to talk about some others. So bear in mind that those are all resources that you bring with you. Here it talks about questions and changing subjects. We already talked about open and closed-ended questions, so directive or non-directive questions. If it's directive, you're asking them about something in particular, like how is it going with your children? Or how was your trip? So you get the ball rolling in a certain direction. Non-directive is I wonder what you're thinking about or what's been going on with you lately, where they get to pick the subject. And then again it says changing subjects should be gently done once that particular subject has run its course. Some don'ts. Don't steer away from difficult subjects, even though most people don't want to run into a burning building. But sometimes, you need to run into the burning building. So if something is hard or if tears come, that's probably okay. Just be gentle with them, be gentle with yourself. As already mentioned, don't launch into your own story, or you can make quick reference. I was in the Bahamas once too. But it's their experience there, not yours. That's the point. Don't go poking through their purses or wallets, even if they ask you to. It's tricky, better they should do it, or you get someone from the facility to do it. The same with physically moving them. They may be in that position for a particular reason. So when they say, could you just get me out of bed and into this chair? Or can I have a drink? Would you go get me some water? All those kinds of things. In a home setting, that's probably okay. In a healthcare setting, that's less okay. So it's always good to check with staff. And then don't ignore other people. I know I'm moving quickly here, but and all of this flows really very naturally, and you've all done visits before, so you know what it's like. But getting out of the room then should happen when they appear tired, or the conversation has kind of run its course, or you've been there for an hour and a half and it really seems like long enough. If they feel physically uncomfortable, or if they say just about anything that helps you jump to the conclusion that this one's done now, I'm getting sleepy, or it's time for me to go to lunch, or, I need to use the restroom, or, it's time for you to go. Yeah, that's 1C. So, or they have to go to a meal or some other activity. So something will wrap it up. And even if you love them to death and you'd like to stay there forever, there does come a time when it needs to be done. And it might be because you've got to go on to see somebody else. Although it doesn't say so here, I would encourage you never to use language such as, I need to leave now because I have to pick up my kids, or I have to leave now because I have to go grocery shopping, or I have to leave now because I need to see Fred from church, Fred. Because the conclusion they might then jump to is that those things are more important than staying here with me. In all my years of leaving rooms when I visited people, when I've said, it's time for me to go now, I have never had anybody object to that. They always seem to accept it. Just, it's time for me to go now. Or I have another 5 minutes, which is another good trick to use if someone is really talking up a storm. I can spend 10 more minutes with you today. So those are cues that the visit is winding down. You can end the visit by moving away a little bit. We talked about this body language last time. Is if you're leaning in, as you did with your husband, then lean back. Turn up the volume to the TV, something. So they get the cue that it's time for you to go now. Plan another visit. That's fine too. So now you're out of the room, and that's a great time to make notes, as it suggests here, when it's all very fresh. You can do that in any number of ways. There's a form we're going to look at in a little bit where you can take notes. You can do it on a laptop or a phone or just any place. Dictating is even possible. A lot of our phones do that. All right. The disclosure document. Was there anything about that? This is the background check. Was there anything about that document that was confusing to you? I invited you to take a look at it. Here in this church, it goes to Brian Holstrom, our operations director at Coon Rapids, someplace else probably. Give it to your pastor.
Okay.
If that's not the document they'd like to use, and then these days, congregations almost always have something. For Sunday school teachers, anybody that does one-on-one work or works with kids. So whatever document they use in your church, my advice to you is to complete that and process it before you go visiting people on your own. Safe Church Guidelines is the same thing. The document that's in your packet is the one that we use here. It came out of the United Methodist Church. All of you are Methodists, so I'm thinking that whatever it is that is used in your congregation, it's probably pretty similar to that. So just take a good look at it. I can tell you, and we'll talk about insurance in a moment, but there never has been a case where we have had anything even resembling a complaint of a visitor, let alone litigation.
But the Safe Church Guidelines seems to relate more to children
It's
than
an awful lot for children. But there are protected groups, and children,
Vulnerable adults.
but vulnerable adults are too. So we're going to see, a lot of the times we'll be going to see vulnerable adults. So this is Ann, this is Jeff, this is Kristin. And I'm so glad that they're here today because they're gonna, one of them is gonna take the lead on each of these subjects, but they can all kind of chime in and you can ask questions. And there have been a lot of questions about this, the assignment process. How is it that you get connected with the people that you're going to see?
Well, here at Hennepin, our assignment process is through Frenchie McGee now, correct? Is that?
It is now, yes?
Yeah. So when Hennepin created this initiative, Sally Johnson, who knew the congregation well, assigned us, and now Frenchie, who has been here less than a year, has tried to assume that process, and I think she's probably partnering with Mark a lot, but most of the time, the clergy staff here at Hennepin knows who is homebound and who needs to be assigned. So I want to step aside for a minute bit. So you're from Coon Rapids?
Correct.
And where are you two?
Coon Rapids, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Robbinsdale.
Robbinsdale, okay. So I assume that you have somebody, is this an initiative that is starting?
We're just starting up, and I believe our pastor at this point will probably be in charge. We haven't really, she's sending three of us to the training, and then we'll go probably and meet and set up our program at
Right.
that point. So we'll
Right.
have to determine who will be in charge of it.
So she
Pastor Dunham, yeah.
is probably is going to make a subjective determination on who your chemistry would be best with to assign you. But I'll tell you a little bit about the assignment process where I was concerned. I was, Sally Johnson kind of assigned us geographically. I live on the west side of town. She assigned me to Jones Harrison, which is a care facility very close to where Mark lives. And so I handled everybody at Jones Harrison for a little while. At one point I had 3 pairs and I didn't know any of them. And I had pretty good chemistry with one of them. One of them was in hospice. She never regained consciousness anytime I visited her. So I would go in, I'd pray a while, I'd leave a card. And that was, so it was the experience among those 3 were very different. It came to pass that one of the people I was assigned to at Jones Harrison, I didn't think I ever really clicked with very well, frankly. She was never all that excited to see me. Therefore, I wasn't. Therefore, I wasn't all that excited to go. And so it's got to be. There's got to be chemistry. So eventually, I traded for her. There was somebody else on the team that also lived in the neighborhood. I said, "Would you be willing to go and call on this person?" And she was. And she had been assigned to a gentleman who I knew pretty well, who is still my pairing. So I'd say it's got, within the church, it's just got to be an organic process. I think if your chemistry is not good with the person, then make a change. But it did make sense to assign us kind of geographically what's going to be the most convenient way for you to get to these places. So now my assignment, actually he does live in a care facility, but he's not homebound. He's a 93-year-old guy who still drives, still attends services once in a while. We go out for pizza once a month.
Wow.
And he's an active member of our community still at 93. I thoroughly enjoy seeing him. I think he enjoys seeing me. And we know each other pretty well now, and we hang out. So the bottom line is find an organic process that you feel comfortable with, and that you can really become bonded. The only other thing I'll say about assignments is that you carry them after their life ends. 4 of the people to whom I have been assigned have passed away. And so we've become, we didn't become intimately connected with their families, but been to all their funerals, and so you'll carry them past the time they're on this earth. For instance, in the people to whom I was assigned to Jones Harrison, 2 of the 3 were they were with it. They were one was Eileen and the other was Dorothy, and they weren't surprised that I knocked off. In fact, I did make appointments with them both times. I really, especially as a guy calling on a woman, I think it's very important to make an appointment. I would never just knock on. In fact, Jerry and I always have a lunch date, so he's never surprised. So I can't imagine knocking on somebody's door unless they are in hospice and they're not conscious, that they wouldn't have a warning that you were coming.
Couldn't it
So-
be that family might have asked, though, like in case of Alzheimer's or something like that? A family member might say, just check on them, and
Yeah.
or
And it
someone
could
from the
be-
church could say so-and-so has been ill and
Yeah.
maybe would like a visit or something.
Yeah, Marie was the person I was assigned to at Jones Harrison who never was aware I was there, and I'm assuming that Sally worked it out with them, that she knew somebody was going to call on them from Hennepin. So yes, it should be. I just don't think somebody should come in without some sort of
Knowing that the
pre-arrangement.
person wants
Yeah.
to visit.
Yeah.
And I
yeah.
did something slightly different, Jeff. I mean, I had an assigned person, but because I've been a long-term member of Hennepin, when I knew that people were sick or something, I would call them and go visit them. And they were not long, ongoing things, but they were shorter. And that's, I think, part of the care team as well.
Yeah. So that's the assignment process.
Yep,
Anything
good.
else you were expecting there?
No, that's great.
Okay, all right.
So it's tailored. We try and match people with someone that the chemistry is good.
Yeah.
And as Jeff says, if the chemistry isn't good, switch. We have a lot there in our team. There are 18 members, so if it's not working with one, we'll try somebody else. Yeah.
So Ann's comment raised a question in my mind. If we learn that someone is ill or would like a visit but hasn't been assigned to somebody, how do we bring that information to Frenchie
Tell
in our
Frenchie.
case, or?
Right, it
Yep.
would be Frenchie. And
Or
it's-
in whatever congregation you're from, just check with the pastor. So you coordinate visits. The most simplest of things, it would be kind of a waste of human resources if you both showed up on the same day. So maybe Jeff will go today and I'll go tomorrow, and somebody else will go the next day if it's a situation that requires daily attention. So just coordinate your work, that's all we suggest.
So it
Well, there's
makes
another
sense to-
factor. It's when Sally was the one assigning, she would sometimes assign me people that she thought needed to be looked on by a psychologist. And I would do that and report back.
Yeah, or a nurse. So we try to make it the right fit for a whole variety of reasons.
I don't fill out this form.
You don't?
No, I just send an email to it at the point where, in fact, we have an email address here at Hennepin, which is a nice, so it's care team.
Pastoral care.
Pastoral
at
care, right.
HEMC, yeah.
And I copy, now I'll start copying Frenchie. In fact, full disclosure, I don't report every time Jerry and I go have pizza. I report,
This is new too, from when I went through training.
Yeah.
This is way more institutionalized.
So I think it's probably a good thing that we have the resource, but I think bottom line, as long as the church knows you're making the calls and that person is covered, I mean, the church knows that I've got Jerry covered. And that if something goes on with him, and certainly he has many friends, he's very well connected here at the church. So, but in terms of an official visitor, I'm it. And so it's my responsibility to make sure that the church knows I'm visiting him regularly.
If we learn of other people that no one is seeing, should they be getting some attention?
Yep, they should.
Maybe.
And that's really, again, I'd come back to Frenchie. I mean, that's the, if this thing is being well orchestrated here, then it's got to be kind of coordinated centrally. And in terms of pastoral staff, it's her responsibility now.
We also have a visitation pastor here who sees a lot of the people that our care team members see. So coordination there is good too. So
you should CC Jim McDonald?
Well, if you, in the case of this congregation, if you send your visit report, such as the one that's on the board, so here's, there's a template in your notebook, but this is just the template put into a form, and some people just write a story. They just send a little paragraph.
Like this?
So, for example, a lot of visitors might just use number 7, like what did we talk about? What are my goals for the visit? How did it go? So this is a sample of one particular report on the screen. But sending something is helpful because we track that stuff around here. I mean, Methodists, like a lot of Protestants, count things. So we count these encounters and turn them into the conference. There is the bean counting department here at this church, as there are in most, and all of this stuff matters. Sending something in is very helpful. If you send it, in the case of our congregation, if you send it to pastoralcare@humc.org, it goes to all of the pastors, to the church statistician who keeps track of names and places, and also is our coordinator of funerals, and then you copy it to me because I'm not on that mailing list. So in this church, you just send it to pastoralcare@humc.org and to me. And someone will write back to you, it's often me, just commenting on the visit, or any challenges that you might be facing with this person. And then it goes into a record, and example, there's a funeral here this morning. When a pastor does a funeral for someone they don't know very well and they could go back to the record of your visits, it's a tremendous advantage to be able to read what's been going on with this person lately. So the clergy will do that if they don't know the person very well.
Well, it seems to me that emails are much better than forms.
Way better, yes.
Yeah.
Some people do, in fact, these still do show up in my mailbox, these forms. And if that's your preference, then but what I'll do with it is scan it and send it to pastoralcare@humc.org. And so with your congregation, at the other churches that are represented here today, just work that out with your pastor. How would she or he like to receive that information? So this is the form, and then on the back side of it also talks about just doing it
Do
in
they get
narrative
any
form.
referrals from people in the congregation
Oh, sure.
who know people?
Yeah,
'Cause
occasionally we'll put it in the bulletin. If there's someone, particularly now when this next class graduates, it'll be in the bulletin, and we'll invite members, if they know someone who could benefit from a visit, let Frenchie know. And then we'll attempt to make the
I'd
minutes.
like to add something, that if the assignment doesn't seem to work at first, that doesn't mean that it won't work, because the person to whom I was assigned last summer, I went and visited, and I thought we were getting along just fine, and when I left, I said, well, would you like me to come back? She goes, well, no, that's okay. But she's got kids in the area, she's got a caretaker that comes in 3 times a week, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just sit on this a while. Well, I delivered her Lily last week, and she was just wanted me to come in and sat down. I was there like an hour and a half, and she was just talking, and was really happy to see me then. So it's, things are changeable.
So give it time.
Well,
It's a matching
there's
process.
also some shame sometimes with people thinking, oh, I'm not so old, I need a visitor. Or I'm not so shut in, I need a visitor, or something of that sort. So that's, something to keep in mind, that some people feel that they're uncomfortable about it.
Yeah. And then, as this last slide mentions, if something pretty urgent is going on, don't email. Pick up the phone and call the appropriate person. It might be the pastor, it might be the nurse at the nursing station, but if there's an issue that needs following up, you need to be their advocate, and it's just fine to do that. I would want that.
How about following up with the family? I mean, is there sort of an obligation, like they're expecting us to give feedback to them about certain things, or is that getting too
Well, there may be a
involved?
privacy issue, so they may say things to you that they would rather not have their family hear.
I would,
So you should get permission.
yeah, I would talk to the church staff first, and I wouldn't just on my own contact their family members.
So, yeah, again, it can be a consultative process, where if the person you're seeing is, I miss my son like crazy, he just lives, 2 miles away, why doesn't he ever come and see me? Well, you might need to do a little exploring, see what's going on in that situation, and starting with the pastor is fine. But if you call the church up and they don't know what the deal is, I don't think it would be out of line for you to call that son and say, I visited your dad today, I wanted you to just know that I was there, and see where that goes. It may be that, I've always said this, the neediest person may not be in the bed. Bear that in mind. It might be someone else in the family circle, so, you gotta figure that
I was
out.
gonna say, Jeff had said that he put a card on the table too, and just, I think for a lot of people, I've had several aunts, my parents passed away, but my aunts that needed visits and stuff, and I think they just want to know that somebody cared enough to come see their
Yeah.
family member.
You'll get the
Yeah.
Hennepin folks and everybody should have
Yeah,
these
so
cards.
maybe you don't need to check in so much.
I thought it was a
Just-
greeting card you left. No.
Yeah,
You have a
well, you can do
business
that
card.
too, but it's, it's a
You
care
could,
team
yeah.
card that, or do something even more creative, but something to indicate you are there and we care about you. Yeah.
I think both, actually. A greeting card or a bookmark would be a perfect thing to leave.
Yeah.
Mark, on our form, it lists home communion and prayer shawl. What expectations are there for those two
Well,
items?
Dwight Haberman, who you have met, is gonna be coming back and talking about bringing communion around to your care receivers. The expectation would be in the mind of your care receiver. Do they want that? If you want a prayer shawl, not every church does this, but a lot of them do, where someone in the congregation knits prayer shawls, and then you give it to them with a little message that usually goes along. Let them know that they're embraced, by their congregation and by God when they wear it. It's a nice, comforting thing.
So
My
we
mother
wait for them
received
to
one.
ask, or we offer it?
Well, again, I don't know what the supply is, so you have to check with whoever it is that makes them. Here we have the Naughty Quilters, I think.
No.
Is it not them?
No,
It's
it's
a
a
different
separate,
Separate group?
separate
So
kid.
some- So somebody does it. So again, when I was doing much more visiting, I just kept a couple of them in my trunk. And then when I needed one, I pulled it out. I don't see anything wrong with that if you got one, so it's just ready to go. And as for communion, we'll explain how that happens, I think, next time, or the time after. Okay, privacy referrals. So I talked about that. There's a document in your book called Privacy Referrals and Duty to Inform. Is that you?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
that's Ann. Take it away.
Okay.
sometimes you'll see people that really need to be seen by somebody else. Since I do mental health stuff, that's what I think about. You see somebody that just really seems depressed, then and you're not sure whether they actually have been diagnosed with depression, and what depression looks like is just sort of sighing and slow to react, helpless, hopeless, sort of talking. They may complain of trouble with sleeping or eating. Anyway, you probably will get the sense of it. So the first thing to do is to talk to the pastor, and describe what it is that you saw, and then if there's something more, then your pastor will direct you as to what the next step might be. It might be you and the pastor talking to the person. It might be talking to a family member. It depends on the particular situation.
Does all depression need to be fixed?
No, well, again, that's sort of a call. Sometimes yes and sometimes no. And maybe, the person is already being treated for depression. But sometimes you see this really as a reaction to grief, when somebody has lost somebody in their family.
Or maybe they're dying.
That's also possible too. It's a red flag, shall we say.
Okay.
Let's say you determine that somebody is not having enough food, and you can refer them to food shelves, or maybe Meals on Wheels, or find any other kind of food resources. The best person that I can know of that has their finger on all kinds of referrals in the community, community resources, is Mary Martin. They have the Dignity Center has a huge online resource referral sources, and that would be for things like free food would be an example. Dental care, if somebody needs to have their teeth fixed, you may never do this, and you might need to do it more than once. But if that's something that can be reached out there in the community, that's one of the best resources. When to refer? Well, when you can't provide a need. Like, one of the things that people may ask you to do, help them physically, and that's not a good thing to do. In fact, it's not a good thing to do at all. If somebody is talking, like they're talking about suicide, that is a major, that's a 3-alarm fire. And as issues come up, like this vulnerable adult situation, we can enlarge our knowledge. And as we get to know each other, we know who we can call to ask about what. I mean, I don't know all the care team members, who they are and what they're good at, and the care team meetings will provide that.
Well, and I think this 300 number is a scary number, because we're not even beginning to cover them. And so we ought to be covering a much larger percentage of them than we are. And the care team meetings would be a way to get after it, I think, to make sure that the people, like right now, I only have one assignment. And I could probably take at least 1 or 2 more.
Right.
And we need to recruit more people, so thank God you 2 are willing to step up.
Well, and of those 300 people, I imagine they might have different levels of need or expectation, and somebody might enjoy a once-a-month visit, and somebody else might need to be called on every week,
Right,
or something like
Yeah.
that. So I think some assessment, I don't know what we know about these 300 people, but
I'd
Just that
actually like
they're
to see the
between-
list.
Well, a lot of it is age-driven, so if they're 70 and above, I think is where that line is
Is it
drawn.
70 and above or 80 and above?
Gosh, I'm almost there.
It's, yeah, no, and, me
Maybe
too.
someone will come and visit.
So I don't really need a visit, but there may come a time. So it's one trigger.
Well, think about it, the people that, I mean, the other thing is that people are gradually moving into the need for having support.
Yeah. So this is what we sit around at care team meetings talking about people like this and said, who is it that we should, the squeakiest wheels will get the attention, I suppose, and I'm sorry for the ones we miss. If we don't know about them, we can't help. But that's why we put out a sort of a cold call every once in a while and just say who out there could benefit from a visit.
But it needs to be more systematic.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
And Jim is a wealth of information.
Yep.
He sometimes stops me in the hall and says, can you go visit so-and-so? I think they would benefit from a visit. And he's visiting people here, there, and everywhere. He loves doing it.
In a smaller church is probably more manageable, but when we're dealing with 1,500 people, it's just tough trying to figure out who's neediest. Yeah, Kathy.
What's expected of us as non-members of your church? I mean, will we be holding our own care? I mean,
Yep, we're going to turn you loose, and you're.
Yeah, really.
Someone, me and someone else will do your final interview with you, and then we'll wave farewell and say we'll see you the next time we have a joint team meeting, and we'll invite you to come back to hear about maybe referrals. But you should set up a system within your church for communicating with the congregation as to you being a resource, and your pastor as to what you've seen and uncovered when you've gone to see folks. So communication is really very important.
in our case, it's just me. I mean, there's not
Yep.
the pastor, obviously, but there's no one else.
So if I were you, I would try to set up a meeting with that pastor once every week or two, just to talk about who it is that, how much time do you have to give, and who are the neediest.
Maybe she can recruit other people.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
When will there be another training?
Well, Frenchie wants to do in the fall, so more power to her. If, all we need is a classroom full of people. It's not hard to duplicate this, so, yeah. So if you know of others in your church, now that you've been here, that might be good candidates, then,
Very elderly congregation.
yep.
They're not willing to.
Well, that doesn't mean that they're not
Well,
capable of
for the most part,
helping, but, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah,
I'll
okay.
try and convince them of that.
All right, well, we are a good half an hour over, but do you have any last questions about what we've discussed here? These are the nuts and bolts of this business. Okay, I'm going to turn these three loose with huge thanks. This section of our time together today has to do with anger at God, which is a thing. It's a thing. We heard some quotes from the 23rd Psalm in our devotions for today, but this little verse from the 22nd Psalm, echoed by Jesus on the cross, is something that people really feel, but sometimes have a bit of a hard time talking about it. So we're going to talk about it today so we can help them work through it as you happen to encounter folks. So what are some reasons people might be upset with God?
They lost a child.
Lost a child. What else?
Grave illness.
Grief, illness.
They prayed and it didn't seem like they got any.
Yep, not getting the answers they're looking for. Yep. Here's some things other people have said. Sickness, a death, disaster, trouble with a friend, trouble with a family member, trouble at work, trouble at home, trouble at church, trouble. All sorts of things that are troubling to people. Maybe that's happened to you. Maybe you've felt okay talking about it, maybe you haven't. But if you have, you are certainly not alone, and it's quite old. We all know how the 23rd Psalm starts, but this is a couple of more verses from the 22nd Psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far away from helping me? The words of my groaning, I cry by day, but you don't answer. Cry by night, but I find no rest. Sometimes when I've spent time with people who are pretty upset with God, I'll point them to these verses and indicate, you're not the first one who's been upset with God. And the theme of a lot of the Psalms of complaint are, come on God, come around, take better care of us, or we'll go find some other God to worship. The Israelites were very clear in terms of their relationship. It was more dialogical than you might think it is today. It might be today. Really trying to whip God into shape. They're feeling persecuted. And people do, in fact, feel persecuted. So we're going to take a look at a little scene from a show called West Wing, one of my favorite TV shows ever. So we have President Jed Bartlett in the Washington Cathedral. The funeral has just concluded for his secretary, Mrs. Lanningham, who got a brand new car, and she was in a wreck and she died. He mentions Josh Lehman, who was one of his staffers who ended up getting shot when there was an assassination attempt on President Bartlett. And then there's a flashback to Bartlett's college days where he puts out a cigarette in the Washington Cathedral and just mashes it into the ground, which is something he did back at Harvard, I think, because his dad was the dean of students, and it was his little way of protesting everything that his dad was doing. And similarly. Then the last line is that it was his third year of his presidency, and it was time to think about re-election, and Hoynes was his vice president, so that's his parting shot. You get Hoynes, you don't get me anymore.
It was a beautiful service, I thought. I thought it was a beautiful service. Yeah. She was a real dame, old friend. A real broad. Yeah. We've got to go back to the office now, sir. Yeah. We've got some decisions to make now.
Leo, would you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Would you ask the agents to seal the cathedral for a minute? You're a son of a bitch, you know that? She bought her first new car and you hit her with a drunk driver. What? Is that supposed to be funny? You can't conceive, nor can I, of the appalling strangeness of the mercy of God, says Graham Greene. I don't know whose ass he was kissing there, because I think you're just vindictive. What was Josh Lyman? A warning shot? That was my son. What did I ever do to yours but praise his glory and praise his name? There's a tropical storm that's gaining speed and power. They say we haven't had a storm this bad since you took out that tender ship of mine in the North Atlantic last year. 68 crew. You know what a tender ship does? Fixes the other ships. Doesn't even carry guns, just goes around, fixes the other ships, and delivers the mail. That's all it can do. Gracias, tibiago domine. Yes, I lied. It was a sin. I've committed many sins. Have I displeased you, you feckless thug? 3.8 million new jobs, that wasn't good. Bailed out Mexico, increased foreign trade. 30 million new acres of land for conservation. Put Mendoza on the bench. We're not fighting a war. I've raised 3 children. That's not enough to buy me out of the doghouse. Hey, credo, adeo pio. Adeo justo. Adeo shito. Cruciatos in cruciam. Tuis in terra servos nuntias fui. Officium perfecce. Cruciatos in cruciam. Eas in cruciam. You get Hoynes.
So if you're not entirely up on your Latin, this is the translation. Thank you, Lord, am I to believe these things from a righteous God, a just God, a wise God. Send your punishments unto a cross. I was your servant, your messenger on earth. I did my duty. To a cross with your punishments and to a cross with you. And some other translations are to hell with your punishments and to hell with you. I remember a conversation with a former seminary professor who had left not only his teaching but had left the ministry, whose child was in a terrible automobile accident, was quadriplegic. I was very young in my ministry, and I was spending time at a synod assembly, a Lutheran synod assembly, with this guy who was known to some people that I was with, and so we were having lunch, and he said, there can be no God. For this terrible thing to happen, I was a servant, I was doing everything right, and this befalls my family. I'm done with it all. Out with the bathwater goes the baby. That's hard to work with. If somebody's angry with God, you kind of have something to work with, because there's still a relationship, even though it's fractured. But when one gives up the faith entirely, that's a tougher nut to crack. Hopefully, by relationship with you, you can help mend that fence. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But it can be very difficult. Here's something a little more current, a video from a television show called The Village. If you've been watching that program, very interesting. A story of a building full of people who look after one another, and one of them has come down with a recurrence of a cancer.
Really? So I don't know that we would always meet somebody who's angry with God.
Well, I think it's less common rather than more common. Whenever I've heard someone being kind of angry with God, at least in the back of my mind, I always think, well, how, or when they say something, well, I guess God knows best, or God needed another little angel if a child dies. And I think, well, how can the source of my comfort also be the source of my pain? So it doesn't work very well to my way of thinking, but some people are mad, and being able to point the finger of blame somewhere is just natural. There are trials going on in our city right now, so we can figure out where to point the finger of blame because this bad thing happened. We want to be able to blame someone or something, and goodness sakes, you smoke cigarettes all your life and you come down with lung cancer. Where does that finger of blame go? Yet some people are mad that God didn't just fix it.
I think the important thing at that point in time, though, is to meet the person where they are. It doesn't matter if you would have that same reaction.
No, what you think about it doesn't matter.
Right.
What matters is what they think about it, and because you remember how it went with Job? For a week, his friends sat there and let him just fuss. And at the end of, they all sat there silently. Then they let him fuss. After a week's time, then he spoke, and started to purge himself of all that poison. It's whatever the bad thing is, that's bad enough without carrying around the toxic poison that comes with it when you're so mad.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that we just have to be open to where that person is. So if you came to visit me and you wanted to know why I wasn't mad at God, I would tell you, and I would hope you would not try to push this point.
Well, no,
Yep.
but I don't think it would even be appropriate for me to ask you why you're not mad at God.
No, but you could say, well, how are things going with you in the Lord?
Right.
You might ask a question like that. Tell me about your relationship. Is your faith, how does your faith inform this situation? So it's a kind of a neutral question, and they'll go with wherever they want to go with that. And maybe they will trust you enough to tell you if they feel this, and maybe they won't, because it's hard to...
Be a situation too where, I would feel like I wouldn't maybe have all the pastoral answers. Maybe it would be an opportunity to refer to the pastor.
Might be. Although remember that
there to listen, but
the thing is, when you're there, you're the minister, you're the church.
yeah.
You are the one that's been sent, and right now it's you. You're the one that's with me right now. I want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to the pastor. Talking to the pastor can be hard. Saying something like this to a clergy person might be a little difficult for somebody. But saying it to another lay person, well, just listen to the protest. Remember, that's what worked with Job, and that's what worked with most people, is if you can just say ouch when it hurts. And somebody who gives a darn is there to listen to that.
Sometimes
That
people need to
itself,
vent. They just need
that
to-
itself is healing. Listen and accept the protest. Over time, it may point the way to a deeper relationship. Just accept it. Said, you're okay with me. I still care for you. There's nothing that you could say that would ever drive me away. So, you don't need to fix it or defend it. You don't need to be God's front person in this situation. I think God can handle this stuff. And I've been hearing it for a long time. So, you do have to believe in God to be mad at God, so you have something to work with. If the care receiver expresses some anger at you, and this might happen sometimes, it's probably nothing you said or did, but it's the situation in which they found themselves. And you're a convenient target. You're not the nurse, you're not the doctor, you're not the family member, you're not the person that holds the lifeline in any way, but you're a friend that's come to see them, and they may just be ornery. Kristin was talking about the lady that told her, you don't need to come back. So, but she did. She came back and was well received. But you're an easy target. Anger at God sometimes does come out as anger at others. So if that happens, the little duck, let it roll off your back like water off the duck. Apologize if you need to. If you did say something that maybe was not very helpful, and then debrief if you need to. Talk to another care team member or your pastor or someone that you trust. Remembering privacy is important, to just get through it yourself. Anger is one of the emotions you will see when you go to visit people in pain, and it's very normal. Your job is to just receive it. Put it in that empty place that you prepared, someplace within you, and then on your way home, just vent it.
Would it be appropriate to encourage them to use their anger to seek some resolution of their feelings, their situation?
I don't know. It takes a long time. Either way, it takes a long time. I'm kind of suspicious of miracle cures in situations like this. I mean, miracle psychological cures where somebody says something and all of a sudden they feel better. We're not very good magicians. At least I've not found myself to be. Although, if it's appropriate, you could tell your own story. Here's how I dealt with a loss in my life. That may be a time to interject something out of your own history.
Well, I wasn't thinking so much of that as encouraging them to think about what control they have, if any, in that situation,
Sure.
and how they would use their anger to, maybe venting it would be enough, but use their anger to create a plan.
So that's a sort of an adult-adult conversation, and maybe that would work, maybe it wouldn't. If they're approaching it intellectually, if they're approaching it more as a little child, it may not work all that well. But you can ask some questions. So, what do you do with your anger? Or how have you handled other difficult situations in your life? To see what their own history is of managing difficult events. It can be tough. Oh gosh, I want to just do this. So I want you to pair up 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's do 3 and 2, and just take a couple of minutes. We have 5 minutes left. We're only going to be able to do this once, but one of you step forward and either make something up or tell a real story about a time you were kind of frustrated. Something didn't exactly go the way you wanted. And if you have never felt that, then make something up. Just make something up. So one of you is a listener, one of you is a talker. In the case of you two, so you'll just do that. In the case of you three, one of you will be a listener, one of you a talker, and the other one is an observer. And so if you would just, as best you can, just jump into the story, and then the listener uses the techniques we've talked about here last week. Reflect emotion, the 7 keys of listening. What are you hearing that's not being said, as well as what is being said, and talk your way through a little bit of a story. And then when you're done, give some feedback to the listener. Yeah. Okay? Ready, set, go.
Yeah, I was in a Bible study fellowship group and in the leadership circle, and the leaders were just we don't pray. I learned so much, and I felt, above all else, I just felt that calm. You know, after it took a while. It didn't just happen right away. It took a while. But I was totally amazed that I could feel joy. The fact that I was grieving, and and beforehand before he died, it totally amazed me, but it was there.
It's been 33 years.
It sounds like that group was really supportive for you.
Very much so. Yeah, it was good. They prayed for me. They prayed for my husband. They showed me ways, just an example, how to pray. So it was very important at the time. You were very attentive. You kind of leaning forward and really listening and making a lot of eye contact. That was really good.
I think I'll hear that.
And
No, that's right.
you had some very good things to say that were not, non-judgmental kind of things. What else could I say?
Do you think
I felt like you really cared about what I was talking about.
With that same situation?
Yeah, I could see a lot of empathy there, and you weren't trying to fix, but you were leaning in, good eye contact, and then just, very attentive.
And you did try to say a lot of things to make me feel good. I mean, you said a couple things, but you didn't go on and
Let you have your feelings is what I was trying to do. Yeah.
So if this opened up something for you, just now here, then before you leave, or at least before this day is done, finish the story, finish the telling of it with someone you trust. Homework. So shadowing continues, devotions, again, in case you're asked, continue with the disclosure document, figure out where it goes in your congregation. I can help you with this church. Read the solos article. Remember, solos are people who are by choice or coincidence without the support that is normally provided by family. For anything as simple as getting to the doctor's appointment, doctor's office, or the grocery store, or someone to be your health care agent in an advance directive when decisions need to be made that you can no longer make. What do people do if they don't have that resource? So we're going to hear from Linda Camp next week from the Citizens League, and she'll talk to us about it. And then the article, The Use of Prayer. It's an old article, but pretty good one, I still think. And then also to mention, next week you're going to have the option of staying after class for another half hour, 45 minutes or so. If you don't have an advance directive and you'd like to fill one out, Linda will be talking about that in her presentation, and we will make one available to you, and we'll work on filling it out. And you could get going on it. You won't be able to finish it next week because there are things you have to do, but it's optional. You don't have to stay after. So that'll start at about 11:35 next week. That, thankfully, is it.